Welcome to another episode of Real Terms for AI with Jason and Aja. Aja, so far in the series, we've obviously talked a lot about generative AI, agents, LLMs, and techniques and tools for integrating these technologies into applications that developers make. But what if in this episode, we talk about scenarios where using generative AI may not be the right thing to do?
Actually, that isn't exactly on brand, but it sounds like a really, really useful episode. There's a lot of great use cases for AI and generative AI, but there's also a lot of times when generative AI isn't necessarily the most effective approach.
Great points. Let's start, though, by talking about the strengths of generative AI.
Okay, it's right there in the name. Generative AI. It generates stuff.
That's a very Jasonian answer. So what is it actually good for?
So there's lots of use cases, and we've already covered a bunch of them in the series, but off the top of my head, it's great at things like generating text, summarizing documents, generating images, writing code, and maybe like writing the text for chatbots or other user interface type situations.
Those are all great use cases, but I think there's probably some more interesting ones also.
Like what?
Like tasks that require multi-step reasoning, combining data from multiple sources in new and novel ways, or even using tools like function calling in memory.
Of course, all the agent use cases that we've been talking about in most of our episodes this year. Those are also fantastic use cases of generative AI.
That is very true. Okay, so those are some of the times where we would absolutely want to use generative AI. But what about times where we may want to use traditional AI or machine learning instead?
So the most obvious answer for that is when there's a pre-trained model that exists and works for your use case.
Examples, please.
Yes. So a really simple one is, say, Cloud Vision API, which can label images, detect important features in images like faces or landmarks, and also extract text in images using OCR.
That is certainly not a generative case.
Exactly. But a lot of problems and use cases that people have aren't actually generative, and they can be efficiently solved with more traditional AI and machine learning techniques. Sentiment analysis and entity extraction in text or speech is another example, and traditional AI models are great at that. They're trained specifically for tasks like these.
And I think that's the point that we were talking about earlier. When there's an existing pre-trained model for your task, using that may be the most efficient way to address any problems that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, another task that people often do with AI is clustering or classification problems, basically sorting and labeling things and grouping them together based on their similarities. For example, in our pet shop, we could sort incoming customer requests into returns, information requests, and billing issues.
That'd be interesting. But what if we don't have a pre-trained model that we could use to sort our requests for our customer service?
Yeah, so with the tools that exist today, it's not that hard to train your own model. There are frameworks and tools to do this for you, but you do need training data.
So in this case, we need a set of our customer service requests that have already happened that are also labeled as things like this was a return request or a billing request or an information request.
Yeah, and if you have that, you can train your own classification model.
But what if I don't have that training data?
So one option is to actually use generative AI in that case. It works for classification problems. It may not be as efficient as a custom-trained model, though. But another option that I think is really cool is using generative AI to create your training data, to generate your training data.
Generative AI for generation. I think we said that was great for the first reason to use it, right?
Yeah.
That's super cool. All right, let's do the third one now, though. When do I not want to use AI?
Oh, so I'll give you my snarky answer, which is when an if statement or a switch statement or a regular expression would work. Use that. It's just code.
Let's elaborate that on a little bit for everyone.
Okay. So if the data for my use case is well-formed and regular, perhaps it's coming directly out of a database or it's coming from another computer system, and what I want to do is relatively simple or straightforward, I may not need AI at all.
All right, so let's go through some examples here.
Okay.
If you need to extract the order number from all of the confirmation emails that our pet shop sent, you could do that with a regular expression because all of the confirmation emails are in the same format.
Or, for example, if I need to route phone calls to specific extensions and the user has already entered the extension, I can do that with normal, boring code. But to recap, because this is a little subtle, let's do some examples.
All right, example 1. Reading emails from my boss to see if they are happy or unhappy with me.
So I'd probably use traditional AI for that, using existing language models that can do sentiment analysis. I'll have another one for you. Summarizing those emails from your boss so that you can respond to them quickly and you understand everything that's going on.
Probably a good use case of generative AI, or doing the really traditional way of picking up the phone. But generative AI, because we're generating a summary.
Yeah.
All right, since we're on email, how would I think about spam detection?
Yeah, that's actually a straightforward classification problem, and there's plenty of training data out there in the world. So you can accomplish that with AI, traditional techniques, or machine learning techniques. I've got one about the pet shop. How would we find all the pictures that our folks have uploaded that have cats in them?
Well, that is a classification task.
Okay.
So we could probably do that with traditional AI. All right, different one. How about responding to people's questions about when their cat food will arrive at their house?
Okay, so if we wanted to write a nice personalized email to people, that would be a good use of generative AI. And because it requires generating some text there. But this actually brings up a good point. You can combine multiple techniques into one agent to address your use case.
So we could write the email using generative AI, but potentially use plain code to figure out, what was the appropriate shipping method for the order, and to use sentiment analysis to determine if the user is maybe stressed and if we should do something to expedite their order for them or not.
Exactly. All of these tools can be combined into one agent or one AI application. Some tools that an agent gets may just be plain code using if statements or regular expressions and other standard programming stuff we've used for decades. Others may use traditional AI or machine learning techniques like pre-trained models or models that they've been trained by the company for this use case. And other tools in the overall agent may use generative AI because they need the capabilities of generative models like advanced reasoning and the ability to generate text. And of course, if you want to learn more, I've linked to a page that includes detailed examples of the different use cases and has a great flowchart or decision tree for deciding which technique to use. We've also put in a couple examples of different techniques that you can try yourself if you want to explore the different options here.
It's all agents and using code and all these methods to build great agents, right?
Yeah, AI is just code.
It is absolutely that, just code. All right, with that, this is Aja and Jason signing off and wishing you all happy prompting.